according to a report from Jacob Wolf, PowerOfEvil has informed TSM that he plans to sign with them as their starting mid laner for 2021, and presumably on a multi-year deal that he would stick with them. You have to assume that he's going to make a pretty good amount of money given the precedent that Jensen set with his deal with Team Liquid, and PowerOfEvil being, at the very least, a pretty comparable player with Jensen in overall quality, and some people would argue a better player. I think if you put him anywhere in that same realm, you can very easily argue that his compensation should be pretty close to Jensen's, not too far off, maybe in that $900,000 million range or a little better. So this is going to be a really big deal and something that TSM is really investing into and obviously feels very confident in. There have been some mixed reactions from TSM fans and the community as a whole. I think there are people out there who are hoping that TSM could make a much bigger splash. People who have this kind of vain hope of a Chovy coming over, which that was never really going to happen. I think people hoping TSM would be in the market for Perks, who is having a lot of talk around him right now. But clearly TSM looked at those options out there and whether they tried for something like Chovy and Perks and couldn't make it work, or whether they decided that the asking price just wasn't worth it and they thought PowerOfEvil was close enough to those acquisitions that the relative difference in price just made it a better choice. I can't speak to their reasoning here, but I actually quite like the move of TSM adding PowerOfEvil. I think they obviously, with Bjergsen's retirement, needed to do something in the mid lane. They needed to, I think they couldn't have gotten away with kind of a young, unproven player that they wanted to build up in the mid lane. I don't think that would have been the right approach for the legacy of this org, for their desire to win now. They don't want to take a year to build a player up. They want to come in here. They want to get their fans excited. They want to have a star mid laner. I think PowerOfEvil is one of the very few options that was available to them to do that. And I think locking him down before the offseason even starts is something that is really lines up with what their organizational goals should be. And I think, again, given the kind of soft mid lane market this offseason, it's a really good move, and they worked with what was available to them. So I think PowerOfEvil does have certain limitations to his play style, where you want to build a team that's going to be able to work around him and enable him. You want to get him into those team fights. You're not really going to put him. It's not that he can't play stuff like a Lucian or a really high pressure Syndra or stuff like that, because he can definitely play those champions. And we saw at Worlds he even did some really kind of different and creative things. And so I don't want to sound like I'm pigeonholing him into a certain play style, but he does a little bit. He's not quite the lane dominant massive pillar that Jensen is. He does some things a little bit differently. I think he's both of those mid laners like to have a lot of jungle help and resources to enable them to kind of stand up and be strong in the mid lane. But I think PowerOfEvil, I would argue he's a little more reliant on it than Jensen is. And PowerOfEvil otherwise will just default to kind of farming at tower a lot of the time and then getting into the mid game and having his biggest impact in the team fights. And let's be clear, his impact in team fights is enormous, and he's really, really good at that. But one thing that I'm a little bit, that I have some questions about, let's say, is a partnership between PowerOfEvil and Spica, compared to the partnership between PowerOfEvil and Santorin, where Santorin's really great at giving his laners what they need. And I think Spica's a little more someone that I think he probably can play that role, but I'd be a little more inclined to have a mid laner who's backing up Spica and making sure that Spica can be successful. I think Bjergsen was able to play a lot of different styles, but he was very good at getting out of his lane, backing Spica up, moving with Spica into the top lane or the bot lane and making a play there together. And I think you're going to get less of that from PowerOfEvil than you got from Bjergsen. And so I think there's probably going to be an adaptation phase for PowerOfEvil and Spica to play together well. And I've been really high on Spica throughout the summer and going into the playoffs and so on. So I hope that this is something that is able to unlock Spica even more and doesn't really curb his growth and turn him into... It's not that I don't think Spica can learn to be that other style of player, or that other style of player is inferior, that more of a control and more of a lane-oriented jungler is not as good. But, I haven't seen as much of it from Spica yet as I saw from Santorin, or that we've seen in the past from someone like Svenskeren or Xmithie, a lot of these kind of more control-oriented junglers. It's a little bit of an older school style of jungling. So it's not so much a concern as kind of an open question about how well PowerOfEvil and Spica could work together on that. I think for the rest of TSM's kind of roster build here, now that we have the Power of Evil move falling into place, I'd like to see them make sure that they've really got a lane dominant bot laner. I think I'm more interested in or more concerned about what they do in their bot lane rather than their top lane. They could do a lot of different things in top lane. You know, they could get impact, they could get licorice, they could do something else there entirely. I think that's fine, but I think they're going to want to have a team with Power of Evil that tends to play through the bot side of the map. So whether that's a revitalized Doublelift who comes back, you know, and plays like he did in the back half of the playoffs, whether that's promoting Lost, I think Lost could be really good in that role as well. And I think either a really kind of enabled and confident Lost could play on a very similar level to a revitalized Doublelift. I don't think we're going to get the peak Doublelift back. If we do, that's huge for TSM. But I think it's a little bit wishful thinking is too strong of a term, but just assuming that Doublelift is going to get back to that peak is probably not very likely. But he doesn't have to be a whole ton better. He just has to be a little bit better to be good enough for this team. Doublelift does. There's a big question about what they would do in support to pair with either of those players. Now that Power of Evil has moved away from FlyQuest, now that Santorin, you know, seems pretty clear he's not going to re-sign with FlyQuest, maybe Ignar becomes available. And I think Ignar coming into this team, having that existing relationship with Power of Evil, that could work out really well if TSM can make that happen. Who he's a free agent, I think he could fit into this game plan very well also. Very good lane dominant support, also knows how to get out of lane a little bit. So, you know, my overall judgment of how good this Power of Evil move is for TSM will depend on what they end up with in their bot lane, whether I think that profile is going to fit. I think this could be, you know, a solid team. Where they would land in the overall kind of hierarchy of power in the LCS depends on the other teams. I think they'll need to have like a really, really big success at bringing in the right support and not fail at the top lane position, whatever they do there, if they want to be on the similar level as the Team Liquid, or we don't know exactly how Cloud9 is going to end up yet. But I think they can pretty comfortably end up in that kind of top 3 or at worst top 4 kind of discussion. We'll have to see how it all plays out as a whole. But if I look at this Power of Evil move to TSM so far, not knowing how the rest of the dominoes are going to fall, I give TSM an A for this move. I think short of you know, hitting a Grand Slam and finding a Perks or a Chovy, this is probably the best they were going to be able to bring in, and without having to take a huge risk on a player coming from another region who some might have trouble adapting and so on. I'm really happy with TSM have done. Again, I give them an A. And I look forward to seeing how they build around Power of Evil for the rest of the offseason.